An interesting topic that I wanted to talk about today is real-time insight into lease operating expenses. With the low price environment that we've had in oil and gas, this is something that's really on top of mind for operators. So I had my good friends, Andrew Bruce, the CEO of Gumbo, and Yusuf Chaudhry, the Executive Vice President of Atlas Operating, come in, and we're gonna really dive into how blockchain can enable operators to have real-time insight into their lease operating expenses.
Hey guys, Yusuf Chaudhry here, Executive Vice President of Atlas Operating. Best damn operator in the lower 48.
Hi, I'm Andrew Bruce. I'm the CEO of Gumbo, where we're building the world's largest smart contract network for industry. And in so doing, we're reducing LOE for our operators.
Guys, appreciate you being here today.
Pleasure.
It's always a pleasure.
Absolute
to be
pleasure.
I wouldn't rather be anywhere in the world than here right now talking operational expenses with Gumbo.
So it's actually a really interesting topic to me. You know, we're going to be diving into real-time lease operating expenses. And one thing that I find fascinating about this, start off with a quick story. I had a buddy from Silicon Valley, McKinsey consultant, and he works with a lot of manufacturing plants, and he came into oil and gas. And he told me one day, he's like, how do you know what the marginal cost of a well is? Can you look at a well and say this well is profitable today? And I told him, I said, the majority of operators can't do that. They can't tell you, on Thursday of this week, was that well profitable? He's like, come on, Colin. He's like, that can't be the truth. And I was like, no, absolutely is. And so I think that there's a ton of room for improvement in efficiency with reporting data. And Yusuf, you obviously run an operating company. You have assets all over the United States. Dive into this a little bit in some of the pain points that you guys deal with when looking at LOEs.
Absolutely. So, kind of like how you said it, when you even say it like that, from a third party kind of looking in, it makes like so much sense. Like, hey, you should know how much this costs. But everything is so far behind in the oil and gas industry when it comes to either technology or not having that technology. And as far as operational expenses go, we frankly are so far behind on so many things because we have an idea, okay, day to day, we're so involved because we have so many, hands, on the ground, people kind of moving around. Hey, we're doing this, we're doing this. Hey, we have this vendor coming in. We have, this cost coming in. We're pulling this well. You kind of have an overall idea. You never have, you can only do it within maybe, you have a 20%, of cost, right? Like you're within 20% usually, but that's not enough when you're trying to, when oil prices are $40, that's not enough. You really have to know how much you're making because some operators, they can make money at 40 and some operators will lose money at 39. So every dollar actually counts from an operational standpoint. So if there's a real-time way to actually see that, hey, this is how much I'm spending, this is how much something costs, this is how much money we've made, and that's obviously oil production and whatever that kind of looks like for an area. That would frankly be, the nicest way to put it is that's a game changer. Because now you have real-time data, you can look at it, you can see, hey, listen, I know exactly how much money I made today, I know exactly how much money each one of my fields made, and now I can actually decide. You actually become much more efficient because now you look at it from a perspective of this field actually makes money and this field doesn't make money. And a lot of the time, it's the fields that you think make money that really make no money because you spend so much time, effort, people, it's so many intangible variables kind of go into that, if you could actually put a dollar amount on it, or if you can actually quantify the data in real time, game changer, absolute game changer.
And coming on, off the heels of what we experienced in Texas with ERCOT and the polar vortex and just, skyrocketing electricity prices, I'm sure that that's more important than ever in a time like that where you need to know real time, hey, electricity is one of our biggest line items on our LOEs. How much is it actually costing us?
Absolutely, man, absolutely. I was mentioning about the ESPs. That's a perfect example. If I can see how much my electrical bills are, I can also see, is my ESP running too much? Is it running not enough? Or, when a well goes down and you can actually look at the costs in tubing and a new pump, all the stuff that kind of goes into it, instead of being like, hey, listen, I got a quote for this much, and instead of waiting to actually put the cost in, you accrue everything, right? So you actually literally you're throwing darts at a board and hoping it sticks. Most of the time it does stick, but there's a lot of times there's a lot of variable change that can happen in the oil field. Things change every day. ERCOT was the perfect example that you put, the polar vortex. Nobody thought what happened in Houston was going to happen. And now it happened. And now you're just like, well, it's a new precedent. Like, what if that happens again? Like, what if everything shuts down? What if you could actually say, there's a lot of people that I know that would personally say, which I'm not saying is a smart thing to do, but if they knew their electrical bill was going to be triple, quadruple, they would rather be like, you know what? I'll go start a fire outside, put a blanket on me, I'll survive. All right. I don't want to pay that cost. Right? Which I'm not saying it's a smart thing to do, but if you can have real-time data to kind of show what you're actually spending and you already know what you're making, it really changes the way that people can actually do business.
Yep. So Andrew, let's talk about Data Gumbo and the solution that you guys have. I'm very passionate about blockchain. You've actually been on the Digital Wildcatters platform a couple of times talking about what you guys are doing. And I think when people think about blockchain, they automatically default to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. But a lot of people don't know that there's so many applications that are a perfect fit for the technology, especially in supply chain and logistics and real-time data and things of this nature. So what are you guys doing to help operators in terms of figuring out a solution for this problem and giving them real-time insight to their operations?
Well, first of all, let's be completely clear. Let's forget about cryptocurrencies. Let's forget about mining. Let's forget about all that rubbish.
But have you seen the price of Bitcoin lately?
Nobody wants to pay each other in Gumbo bucks, right? I mean, that's so. No, I mean the whole premise behind what we do is that the data exists, right? I mean, the data exists. It may not exist within the four walls of any one company. It exists within the supply chain. And companies have already got contracts with each other based on the price book, and you know what you're agreeing to pay for something. So you just have to be able to go and get access to that data. And the piece that blockchain solves is the trust problem, right? So why would I trust my supplier's data when I've got my own data? Well, now you've got two sources of data which probably don't agree with each other, which means you've got dispute and you've got an argument and you've got DSO that goes to 120 days and nobody's got any visibility into what the spend is. And so that's what creates this problem. You've got this problem of I don't trust them, they don't trust us, I'm going to drag out the payment, I can't realize my fast pay discounts. You've got all these issues because people don't trust each other from the operational perspective. But it doesn't have to be that way because the data exists. Like I said, not necessarily within the four walls of one company, but you can sit down with two companies and say, okay, what is the source of data that we trust for this? And use that. And the way we describe it is it's very much like going to a gas station. When you go to a gas station, you swipe your credit card, you pump your gas, and you've got an implicit agreement, well, you have this explicit agreement based on the quality of the gas you pumped and the price of the gas. You know exactly how much is going to be charged, and you make an agreement that you're going to make an immediate payment. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that for industrial transactions. Yeah. So that enables you to get real time.
So I have a question there, right? Maybe more of a complication, if you say. So let's say you get an AFE, and maybe this is a much larger scale question, right? Let's say you get an AFE, and you have the AFE comes out for $5 million to drill a well in the Eagle Ford, and an AFE is generally never right to the dollar, right? It's always to a dollar amount and to a cent amount as well, but it's never that exact number, right? So how do you account for, in a situation like that, I'm just giving an example of an AFE, right? Let's say I have it on my books for $5 million, right? But it actually cost me $5.5 million, or it actually cost me $4.5 million. How do you account for that? Because doesn't that go back to what you're saying about the trust? How do you account for that variable change that kind of comes with the variance in pricing?
Well, I mean, there's ways you can negotiate your contracts, right? I mean, how do you negotiate your contract? Do you negotiate that into the AFE when you negotiate it? Because you should be able to have the flexibility in the contract terms to allow for any fluctuations, right? So that's actually one of the things we're seeing is there's a huge evolution in how contracts are written. How do you account for price changes? How do you account for the variability in the market in the way the contract is written so that you've got you have complete control over your risk profile?
Yeah. So that makes sense, right? You actually have to bake in a bit of a risk tolerance, right, into kind of what you're already doing. That makes sense. I could kind of see that. So I guess how are you guys attacking it? Like you mentioned, right? Like how is Data Gumbo attacking this way of essentially grabbing cost and putting it all in one place where, the numbers are there, the cost is there, but how do you, I guess, gather and make it real time?
Well, I mean, you've got when a delivery is made, you know when a delivery is made, right? So you can read the meter, and you've got the what's called a smart contract, which is just a computer algorithm, and you trigger the computer algorithm when a delivery is made, and you can use that to automate the payment. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. So you're using the IoT data there, and if there's no IoT data there, IoT Internet of Things, if there's no IoT data available, there's a lot of companies. There's a whole new evolution of services which are coming up. It's called data as a service or measurement as a service. So there's no CapEx involved. These companies will come and they'll install a meter, they'll maintain the meter for you so that you've got accurate data that you can trust. And you put parameters around the data so you can say, okay, we expect the data between 9 and 10 or whatever percentage accuracy you're comfortable with. So you read the meter, you trigger the terms, and you've automated the contract.
So how could you account for something like, let's say, preventative maintenance, right? Because the costs are essentially what you have for operations, right? So let's say you have a bunch of costs where your electricity is going higher, and I'm going back to the ESP well, you're running a lot of water, your electrical costs are going high, your ESP pump is bound to, essentially, it's gonna fail within, let's say, 8 to 12 months in this specific situation. How do you find an efficiency to actually take a hold of that? And because that's something that actually bothers us as an operator, right? Is that I wish I could know when my data or when my equipment will fail or when I'm going to incur a cost, capital or non-capital. Is there a way that you can take that data and actually find ways to show what you're going to be spending as well? Not just, hey, this is how much you spent, but actually find a way to show, hey, you're probably going to be spending another $100,000 in the next 12 months.
That's a really interesting question. So the answer is yes. So one of the things that you realize when you've got a blockchain and you're automating your payments, all of a sudden you become incredibly interested in the accuracy of your meters. What we typically see is we show up and there's a meter in the field and nobody's looked at the damn thing for 6 months. Sure. It's probably down. Somebody ran over it and nobody really cares because they're paying invoices sight unseen. I mean, sure. Not unusual, right? But all of a sudden, if you went to a gas station and you pumped your gas and the meter wasn't working on the gas pump, you wouldn't use it, right? Yeah. You want to know that the meter is accurate because you're making payments off it. So one of the good things about blockchain is that it focuses the mind wonderfully that I need to be accurate. I need to make sure the meter is accurate. I'm getting to your point in a minute. Sure. So the net result of that is now we've got a clean source of data that we can use for interesting other stuff. So condition-based maintenance is one of them, right? I used to work for National Oil Varco and MH Worth. And so condition-based maintenance is, and then there's a lot of AI companies who do analytics on machines and when they go down. The problem they've got is data. I mean, data is typically crap, as we all know. Yeah. And so you have to have a good source of data. And because companies are using this data to make automated payments, they're motivated to make sure that the data is accurate. And then you can use the same data. So we have an IoT data platform which feeds the blockchain. And you can use that same feed to feed into a machine learning algorithm, say, this machine is likely to break within the next 3 months.
I got a question in terms of how does Data Gumbo operate between service providers? So let's say that you have Yusuf. Yusuf, one of your biggest costs is, water hauling, saltwater disposal, if you don't have a saltwater disposal well. So you have a trucking company, and then you also have the commercial saltwater disposal facility that they're taking it to. And I'm sure there's a ton of discrepancy between, that entire operation, the water hauler saying that he carried this big of a load, and then the saltwater disposal facility saying, oh, you had this much water. And so is that an instance where Data Gumbo could set up a node between Yusuf, the hauler, and the saltwater disposal facility to make sure that there's an accurate source of truth for the data?
Well, thanks for that question. Yeah, absolutely. So each participant has a node, and the smart contract depends how it's written, but you can do a 2-way or 3-way match. So you can measure how much is picked up from the pad, how much is put on the truck, how much is put in the saltwater disposal well. For the project that we're doing with water haulers right now, it's they have to match within 1.5%. Otherwise, it's flagged as an exception and is not authorized for payment. So absolutely, rather than rounding up and saying, okay, 150 barrels are picked up every single time because it's easier, you say actually there's 120.7 barrels picked up, and it has to match across each leg of the transaction. Otherwise, it's not valid.
Yeah, and then that's all automated. So if it's within that 1.5% allowance, then the transaction
It goes automated through for payment.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, then it gets kicked back to Yusuf or the operator and says, hey, look, this was outside of the parameters.
There's an important point, is there's a win-win on both sides of the transaction, which is not necessarily intuitive. So for the operator, they're getting visibility, they're getting transparency, they know exactly they're paying only for what is actually delivered. And the other thing is fast pay discounts. So there's a lot of companies who have got negotiated fast pay discounts, but they can't realize them because they can't get through the invoices quick enough. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole win from the operator side for the service companies. They get paid on time, and so this DSO of 120 days. I mean, you can get into negotiations saying I'll pay you in 10 days, but I want a 1% discounts, and now I've got my DSO, which is way better than it's ever been before. And for the companies who are trying to differentiate themselves, they've got to win because they can say, look, we can make accurate deliveries, and we're changing the way that the contracts are negotiated and trying to make the oil field more efficient.
Yeah. Yusuf, from an operator's perspective, I feel like the oil field typically has always, kind of been lenient on things like that because, you just, especially in high price environments.
Sometimes you just don't even know any better.
Yeah, and from the environment that we've been in, really since 2015, 16 timeframe, and obviously what we went through in 2020, I'm sure operators are really looking at things like this and wanting to make sure that there's no discrepancies between third-party providers. Is this something that you guys have dealt with?
Oh man, so much. There have been so many times, and especially when actually, it's not when times are great. It's times like, in COVID last year when things were at their worst. Everybody is either, trying to double dip or they're trying to find ways to make up for revenues, right? That they're either not getting. And us, on one hand, as an operator, we're trying to make sure that we're cutting every cost possible. I mean, every operator that I know was going from, there's no more, every cost. No more bagels on Friday type of deal, right? Like it was, how do you cut every cost? And if you could find data like that, I would even go to the next point, is that as an operator, is that I would know if there's a data and let's say there's that 1.5% discrepancy and you're like, hey, listen, there's a disconnect here. All right, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. No, you're doing something wrong here, right? And you could immediately know, and it almost flags vendors, right? It makes vendors more accountable. It makes the operator more accountable because now you can be like, hey, listen, why am I still with this vendor that's water hauling? Or why am I still going to this disposal well, which is having this issue? Or there's so many different ways to kind of look at that because we as an operator care so much about cost because even if it makes, it's a famous line I've heard, it's that you can make $1 billion. I actually heard from Lynn Energy, you can make $1 billion, but if you spend $1 billion, you're gonna go broke. It doesn't matter. You're just gonna go broke. That's just how it is. So if you can actually find ways to cut costs, from a actual live, like from actual live feedback, you could almost say, it's not just, a cost analysis software. Now it becomes more of it holds vendors accountable. You're kind of, you make the vendors who are actually going above and beyond, it highlights them. And the people who are actually the guys who are double dipping and are taking advantage of operators and trying to make their revenues back, it immediately highlights those guys as well and in a more negative light. So I think there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, and I think this is correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the value proposition for Data Gumbo and blockchain as a whole, that it is this trust layer. And it instills trust between different parties. So you can have 3 parties operating together without exposing proprietary data, and they can know that, hey, this is how things actually went. And so I think that you just kind of hit the nail on the head of, what Data Gumbo is trying to do and what blockchain is trying to do across not just oil and gas, but the energy industry as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, just to put it in perspective, quantify it for you, the customers that we've had specifically around water haulage, they're saying they can save between 7.5 and 10% of their expenses.
And that's a quantifiable number, right? When you can actually say, hey, this is how I quantify that number, that's incredible. That's awesome. Because in water hauling, 5 cents makes a huge difference. It depends. When you're hauling thousands and thousands of barrels every day, every dollar counts. And even right now in this environment, I think people are really, really excited right now with oil kind of going up and, stabilizing. Eventually it's gonna come. It's a commodity. It's gonna come down. It's gonna go up. It's gonna stay in the middle. I think when people finally have an idea of, hey, listen, it's not gonna go up to $100 tomorrow, right? It might eventually, but it could absolutely go to $0 tomorrow because it's done that. So I think people have it in the back of their minds that, man, we really have to pay attention to our expenses, and that we cannot be. This can't be a cruise ship that it takes hours and hours to turn. You got to be a speedboat now. Because it literally at a drop of a hat, everything can just go away. So you have to be ready to actually be, you have to be cognizant of your expenses now, actually. And I think what you guys are doing with Data Gumbo, that sounds pretty awesome and kind of exactly what, an operator who's trying to run lean and efficiently should be looking at.
Yeah, it's technology that I'm super excited about. I think that when you look at operators needing to really focus on cost efficiency and have insight to what they're doing, blockchain is the answer for that. So Andrew, thanks for coming by and telling us about what you're working on. Yusuf, thanks for bringing the operator perspective on here and schooling us on what it's like to operate some wells. So thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks, Yusuf.
Thank you.
Thanks for being the straight guy.
No, thank you, man. Enjoyed it.